You don't really belong here, do you?" The words sliced across the ballroom like broken glass on marble. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't subtle. It was loud enough for the string quartet to falter mid-note, loud enough for heads to turn toward the glittering center of the Horizon Foundation charity gala. She stood there in a short crimson dress, sequins catching every chandelier light like sparks from a fire. The white billionaire's wife, young, camera-ready, wrapped in money and arrogance, looked the black woman in front of her up and down, as if she'd discovered an intruder in her living room. A ripple of uneasy laughter floated across the tables. Crystal glasses clinked too hard. Eyes darted toward the woman in orange, our black CEO standing calm in the fire. Her gown flowed like molten copper, warm under the chandeliers but unyielding, structured. Hair swept back into a low knot, not just neat but disciplined, like a crown reforged into silence. The insult landed, but she didn't flinch. She had seen that look before on a campus quad at 20, in a boardroom at 30, and now here, in a ballroom draped with charity banners. The billionaire's wife leaned closer, voice dripping. "Next time, maybe pick something." Understated. "You wouldn't want to look like you're trying too hard." Gasps, chuckles. A few men sipped champagne to hide their smirks. And yet, the woman in orange stood still, her presence filling the air heavier than applause. She didn't answer, not yet. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a fuse waiting for fire. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below, and if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The music picked up again, softer now, as though embarrassed to intrude. A server carrying flutes of champagne slowed near the clash of colors, orange against red, composure against provocation. Guests whispered. Some phones tilted discreetly. A junior reporter covering the gala typed a single line into her notes app. Power versus pretense witnessed in real time. But the black CEO said nothing. Her eyes scanned the room once, steady, deliberate. She wasn't here to trade words under chandeliers. She was here to let the night reveal itself, to let arrogance dig its own grave. And so she stood, molten calm wrapped in silk, while the air around her grew tight with expectation. The Horizon Foundation gala was built for spectacle. Crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and an orchestra tucked behind gilded columns. It was the kind of night where names mattered more than numbers, where introductions carried weight heavier than gold. And in the center of it all, she stood. The black CEO moved through the room quietly, a flame of orange against a sea of black tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns. No entourage, no assistant trailing behind her. Just one woman carrying the calm of 1,000 battles already won. Her dress wasn't loud, but it commanded attention the way sunset does. It didn't ask. It simply arrived. Each step across the marble floor was measured, precise, as though she had drawn the map long before anyone else entered. A passing waiter tilted his tray slightly to give her space. She nodded, soft but firm. He blinked, surprised at the acknowledgement. Not every guest noticed the staff. That small grace revealed more about her than any diamond necklace could. Around her, the air was thick with performance. Politicians trading smiles. Investors laughing a little too hard at the right jokes. The white billionaire's wife, still glowing in crimson, floated from circle to circle, flashing her diamonds as if they were credentials. Her laughter always a note too high, her glance always a second too long. The CEO saw it all, but she didn't intervene. She had come alone, dressed deliberately without markers of wealth, carrying no name tag on her clutch. To everyone else, she was just a guest. And that was intentional, because beneath the music and the wine, tonight wasn't just charity. It was surveillance. It was a test. She remembered another night years earlier, standing in the corner of a graduate mixer. She wore the wrong dress then, too. At least that's what they told her. "You'll never be taken seriously if you don't look the part." They laughed. She didn't, and in silence, she built an empire. Now she stood at another gala, a woman mistaken for less than she was. But this time, the script wasn't theirs to write. From the balcony above, a young reporter typed furiously into her phone. "The donor list leaked earlier. One anonymous pledge covers half the night's fund. Who is it?" She didn't yet know the answer was standing directly below her, calm, unassuming, in a gown the color of fire subdued. At the far end of the hall, the billionaire's wife caught sight of her again. A flash of recognition, or was it irritation, crossed her face. She whispered something sharp to the circle around her. They turned, eyes narrowing, studying the CEO as though she were a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong box. But the woman in orange didn't shrink. She lifted her chin, eyes steady, every movement precise. She was here to be underestimated. She was here to let their assumptions do the work for her, and the night, still glittering and golden, didn't know it yet. But the stage had already been set. The music swelled, violins tracing the air with practiced sweetness, but tension bled through the hall like ink spreading on silk. The white billionaire's wife drifted closer again, red dress flashing like a warning flare. Her circle followed, orbiting her the way smaller stars circle a sun. She carried her glass of champagne like a scepter, tilting it just enough to catch the chandelier light. She stopped directly in front of the woman in orange. "Oh," she said loudly, as though making a discovery for the entire room. "You again?" Her smile stretched too wide, teeth gleaming, words dipped in sugar but sharpened at the edges. She turned toward the cluster of donors beside her. "This is what I adore about charity galas such. Diversity of guests. A pause, a laugh. Some come with legacies, others with only a dress." The circle chuckled on cue, though a few eyes darted away, uneasy. The black CEO didn't move, her breath steady, her gaze anchored. The calmness around her made the mockery feel louder, like cymbals crashing in a symphony. "Where are you seated, darling?" the wife pressed. "I don't recall your name on the premium tables. Perhaps near the back, by the silent auction items." Her tone carried the weight of a velvet rope pulled tight. Someone near the bar muttered, "That's cold." A server balancing hors d'oeuvres paused mid-step, eyes flicking between the two women. The CEO's silence drew the attention of more bystanders. Phones tilted slightly again, catching fragments of the exchange. One young man whispered to his date, "She hasn't said a word, and yet she owns the room more than the one in red." The wife leaned in, voice pitched to Carrie, "Don't worry. Not everyone belongs to these circles. Some of us marry into them. Others, well, they just wander in." Laughter followed like a ripple across water. The wife basked in it, shoulders back, chin high. She had turned the gala into her theater, and the CEO into her target. But the woman in orange remained unmoved, standing as if rooted into the marble itself. Her stillness wasn't submission, it was defiance refined into silence. Up on the balcony, the reporter tapped another note into her phone. "Conflict brewing, gala turning." Down below, a staff member near the sound booth whispered to a colleague, "That woman, she's not ordinary. Look at how she stands." Ugh. The billionaire's wife tilted her glass, taking a slow sip, eyes glittering with the thrill of dominance. "Enjoy the champagne, dear. It might be the most expensive thing you touch tonight." A sharp intake of breath swept the circle. Even the orchestra stumbled on a note. And still the CEO said nothing. Her silence was a weight pressing down on the hall, daring someone else to speak first. The escalation wasn't in raised voices or slammed doors. It was in whispers, in chuckles too loud, in the subtle but unmistakable drawing of lines between who belonged and who didn't, and the woman in red had just drawn hers across the floor of a ballroom she thought she controlled. But the line she drew, that was the very stage the CEO had been waiting for. The laughter lingered, shallow and brittle, echoing beneath chandeliers that had witnessed decades of pretense. But the black CEO didn't break. Her hand adjusted the stem of her glass with surgical precision, as if aligning her posture with the weight of the entire room. She inhaled slowly, a breath that carried neither anger nor submission, just the kind of patience forged by years of being misjudged. She didn't answer the jab about champagne. She didn't return the wife's stare. Instead, her gaze drifted past her over the crowd, toward the stage where a silent auction banner hung with names of donors. Her name wasn't visible, not yet, but she knew it was there, hidden among numbers waiting for revelation. The billionaire's wife tilted her head, unsettled. She was used to retaliation, snapped comebacks, embarrassed apologies. Silence was a weapon she hadn't expected. The CEO's stillness unsettled more than words could. She stood in orange silk like a lit candle in the wind, calm, steady, refusing to go out. A server passed with a tray of petite fours. She reached for one, not hurried, not rattled, placing it gently on her plate. A small gesture, but it screamed, "I am unshaken." Around them, whispers shifted. A man near the orchestra pit leaned toward his wife. "She hasn't said a thing, but I feel like she's in charge." The wife nodded, eyes fixed on the CEO's composed face. For a moment, the billionaire's wife faltered. Her smile tightened. She took another sip of champagne too quickly, glass clinking against her teeth, and the black CEO simply let silence stretch. She knew the power of an unanswered insult. It grew heavier with every second. It forced the room to sit in its own discomfort. Some guests began to frown, not at her, but at the one in crimson. The cruelty, once disguised as charm, now looked cheap under the glare of calm defiance. The CEO glanced briefly at the chandelier above. Its crystals caught the light, scattering it into fragments across her gown. It looked like armor, not decoration. In her mind, a memory rose. Being 25, standing in a boutique, the clerk whispering to a colleague, "She's probably just browsing, don't waste time." She had bought the entire collection that day, but she hadn't raised her voice. She had learned. Patience turns condescension into confession. The lesson breathed through her now. The billionaire's wife leaned in again, desperate to fill the silence. "Cat got your tongue, darling, or do you just not know how to respond?" But the CEO didn't move. Not a twitch, not a blink. She let the wife's words hang, limp, in a room that no longer applauded cruelty. It wasn't submission, it was control. The kind of control only earned through decades of being underestimated and walking out stronger every time. And in that quiet moment, the gala itself seemed to shift guests restless, the orchestra slowing, even the lights feeling sharper. The silence was no longer awkward. It was authority. At first, the ballroom pretended not to notice. Conversations tried to resume, laughter forced itself back into the air. But tension doesn't vanish, it spreads. On the mezzanine, a young reporter lowered her wine glass and raised her phone instead. She had been assigned to cover the charity numbers, not the drama. But the moment she heard, "Cat got your tongue?" she pressed record. The red dot blinked, catching the stillness of the woman in orange and the sharp tilt of the woman in red. Down on the floor, a waiter lingered too long near the champagne tower. He wasn't supposed to stop, but he did, eyes locked on the exchange. Under his breath, barely audible, he muttered, "That's not right." Another server glanced at him, then at the women, then away again. Staff weren't meant to interfere. But injustice has a way of forcing witnesses. Near the silent auction tables, two guests had turned their bodies halfway toward the confrontation. One, a young Latina in a sapphire gown, whispered, "Why is she being targeted?" Her companion frowned. "Because she's different, and because she's not fighting back the way they expect." The billionaire's wife basked in her own performance, but cracks were forming in the audience. Phones lifted subtly, reflections of the chandeliers shimmering in their black screens. Each second of silence stretched, and each second was captured. The reporter on the mezzanine whispered into her mic for her live blog. "Ballroom divided. A guest in orange is being mocked openly. She hasn't responded. Entire room watching." At the edges, even the musicians felt it. The violinist closest to the conductor nearly lost her place in the sheet music, bow trembling. She glanced toward the CEO, then quickly back to her notes, cheeks flushing. And then came the first audible challenge. A man in a gray suit, seated near the stage, called out, not loud, but enough to cut the air. "She hasn't said a word. Maybe let her be." Gasps, heads turned. The billionaire's wife stiffened, mask slipping for a fraction of a second before she plastered on another smile. The CEO remained still, her silence uninterrupted, but her eyes flickered to the man who had spoken, acknowledging his small act of courage. Whispers rolled like a tide. "Someone's filming." "Is this live?" "That woman in orange. Who is she?" The billionaire's wife laughed too brightly, trying to drown it out. "Oh, don't be dramatic. We're just having fun." But her tone rang false now. In the corner, a staff member with a headset whispered into his mic, "We might have a situation on the main floor." And just like that, the dynamic shifted. What had been a private insult was now a public spectacle. Witnesses had risen not with fists or shouts, but with cameras, murmurs, and the quiet courage of saying, "This isn't right." The CEO let it all unfold. She didn't need to raise her voice. The room was beginning to do it for her. The tension didn't cool, it thickened, like smoke filling a room with no windows. The billionaire's wife tightened her grip on the stem of her glass. The smirk on her lips strained, but she refused to let silence win. Her voice rang louder than before, pitched for the audience now gathering in whispers. "Charity should be for those who understand refinement," she said, raising her chin. not wanderers who stumble in wearing sunset gowns. Her friends laughed obediently, though the sound wavered, unsure. The black CEO remained still, fingers lightly brushing the rim of her plate. No response. No retreat. Her silence was a mirror, and in it the cruelty looked uglier each second. The wife pressed harder. Events like these are delicate. One wrong guest can tarnish the entire evening. It's about standards, isn't it? She let the word standards hang, heavy and venomous. From the edge of the crowd, a young man muttered, "She's pushing too far." A woman nearby shushed him, but not before her own eyes narrowed at the woman in red. The orchestra faltered again, the music bending under the weight of the moment. Even the chandeliers seemed too bright, spotlighting the cruelty. And then an escalation designed not just to wound, but to stain. The billionaire's wife stepped closer, feigning clumsiness, tilting her glass just enough. A thin ribbon of red wine slid over the rim, spattering onto the CEO's orange gown. The gasp was immediate, sharp as a blade across silk. A cluster of guests covered their mouths. Someone hissed, "Oh, no, she didn't." The CEO lowered her eyes briefly, glancing at the spreading stain. But her face remained calm, unreadable. She dabbed once with her napkin, nothing more. No outburst, no collapse. The wife tilted her head, faux apology dripping like venom. "Oh, darling, I'm so clumsy. These things happen, don't they?" Her laugh was brittle, desperate for approval. A silence spread instead. From the balcony, the reporter whispered into her phone, "Escalation confirmed. Deliberate spill. Crowd turning." Her live stream comment section erupted. "That was intentional. Keep recording." At the silent auction table, the Latina guest stood fully now. "That wasn't an accident," she said firmly. Heads whipped toward her. The billionaire's wife's smile faltered. The CEO looked up slowly, eyes calm, unshaken. Her silence was now a storm's eye, the stillness before thunder. Guests began to shift, some disgusted, some intrigued, all watching. The billionaire's wife had played her hand. She thought humiliation would end the night. She didn't see that she had just lit the match, and the room, heavy with judgment, was ready to burn. The stain on orange silk was still fresh, dark against the fabric, when the billionaire's wife decided it wasn't enough. Her laughter grew sharper, slicing through the hall. "Perhaps you should step outside, darling," she said, voice pitched like a command masked as courtesy. "We wouldn't want anyone thinking the Horizon Gala lost its class." She gestured casually toward the entrance, a flick of her wrist that treated the black CEO like an inconvenience, a misprint at a royal banquet. And then came the final strike. The wife snapped her fingers, summoning a floor manager in a black tuxedo. He hesitated, eyes flicking nervously between the two women. But her smile was the kind that expected obedience. "Escort her out," she said, words loud enough for the chandeliers to hear. "She doesn't belong in this room." The gasp that followed wasn't scattered, it was unified. A wave of disbelief swept across the ballroom. A donor near the front whispered, "Did she just—" Another murmured, "In public? At this event?" The manager froze. His hand hovered near the CEO's chair, but he didn't touch it. Something in her posture anchored, unshaken, stopped him cold. The wife leaned in closer, crimson sequins flashing like sparks. Her tone dropped, private but venomous. "Women like you should know your place, and it isn't here." It was the line that fractured the night. From the balcony, the reporter's live stream chat exploded. "Racist. On camera. This will go viral in minutes." On the floor, the Latina guest's voice rang out again, louder now. "You can't throw her out. She has every right to be here." Her words cracked open the silence, drawing nods, murmurs, even a smattering of applause. The CEO remained still. Her gown was stained. Her dignity was not. In her mind, memory rose like smoke. Age 24, standing in a hotel lobby in Atlanta. A clerk had looked her in the eye and said, "People like you don't stay here." She had swallowed the insult then, powerless. But she had built power from it, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Until moments like this no longer broke her, they exposed others. Now in this ballroom, the insult wasn't hidden behind whispers. It was broadcast under chandeliers, recorded in pixels, etched into the eyes of every witness. The manager lowered his hand, stepping back. "Ma'am, perhaps," he began, but the billionaire's wife cut him off. "No, perhaps. She leaves. Now." Her voice cracked at the edges. more desperate than commanding. She didn't realize it, but the room had already begun to slip from her grasp, and at the center, the black CEO sat calm, the storm swirling around her, waiting. The ballroom had grown heavy, every chandelier crystal reflecting not just light but tension. The black CEO sat motionless, gown stained, insult fresh, the billionaire's wife practically vibrating with triumph. And then, without raising her voice, without even standing, she reached for her clutch. A single phone slid into her hand. Slim, matte black. She tapped the screen once, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Guests leaned in, straining to catch even the whisper of her actions. "Activate Horizon Protocol," she said quietly, almost conversational. Her tone was the calm of someone ordering coffee, not summoning storms. On the other end, a voice responded instantly through her discreet earpiece. Crisp, professional. "Confirmed, ma'am. Gala systems linked. Ready on your word." She set the phone down on the table, not hiding it. A quiet declaration. Something was unfolding beyond the room's silk and glass. The billionaire's wife faltered, her smirk thinning. "What are you doing?" The CEO didn't answer her. She addressed the air, the orchestra, the chandeliers, every witness leaning closer. "Document everything," she said softly. "Every word spoken, every gesture made. Make sure nothing disappears tonight." Phones lifted higher. The young reporter on the mezzanine whispered into her mic, "She's calling a protocol. Something big is happening. This isn't just a guest. This is something else." The floor manager who'd been summoned to escort her out shifted uneasily. "Ma'am," he began to the wife. "Maybe we should—" "Quiet," the wife snapped, panic bleeding into her tone. "She's bluffing. Just another social climber waving a phone around." But the CEO finally looked at her, gaze sharp and steady. "Bluffing doesn't build empires," she said, her voice low, her words cutting. "And you just played your last card." The ballroom stilled. At the back of the hall, a large digital screen flickered. It had been cycling silent auction items, vacation packages, donated art. Now it froze. Numbers appeared instead: donor figures, transaction logs, encrypted but unmistakably real. Anonymous pledges highlighted in bold. One stood above them all. "Wuxi, Ling, Mei Yuan." Anonymous donor. Gasps rolled through the room. Heads turned. Guests whispered, "Is that her? It has to be." The wife's glass trembled in her hand. "This is absurd." "Who let her?" The CEO raised a hand slightly, and the voice in her earpiece cut through again, calm and cold. "All systems running. Internal verification complete. You're in control." And for the first time, the billionaire's wife realized she wasn't facing a target. She was facing a reckoning. The CEO's silence was over. The counterstrike had begun. The ballroom's air shifted thick with the scent of champagne, silk perfume, and now, revelation. The giant screen glowed at the far end of the hall, the anonymous $50 million pledge, pulsing like a beacon. The black CEO rose slowly from her chair. The stain on her gown was still visible, but her presence eclipsed it entirely. Every head followed her as though gravity itself had changed. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her words landed like a gavel. "You mocked the woman underwriting this entire evening," she said evenly, her voice carrying across marble and velvet. "You called her clumsy, unworthy, out of place." A pause. "I am not a guest. I am the host." The room froze. Glasses suspended mid-air. The orchestra's bowstrings hung silent in mid-note. She took a step closer to the billionaire's wife, each heel strike echoing like a verdict. "I am the lead donor of tonight's gala. And beyond that," she let the silence stretch until it hurt, "I am the largest shareholder of the very chain your husband clings to." Gasps detonated like fireworks. A man near the stage nearly dropped his wine. The young Latina guest covered her mouth, whispering, "I knew it." The wife's smirk collapsed, her face paling under layers of makeup. She stammered, "That's impossible. My husband our family owns." $3.2 billion, the CEO finished for her, voice like a blade. A chain stretched across continents, boards, contracts, and every inch of it tied to decisions I have the power to approve or erase. The reporter's live stream comments exploded. "She owns them. Not a guest. She's the boss. History being made right now." The floor manager, still hovering uselessly, stepped back in shock. His voice trembled. "Ma'am, I didn't know." The CEO's eyes never left the woman in red. "Number, you didn't. That's the problem. None of you asked who I was before you decided what I wasn't." Murmurs turned into voices. One donor said aloud, "She pledged 50 million. Another added, "She owns the chain. Then she owns half this room." The wife's crimson dress suddenly looked gaudy, desperate. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her power, once inflated by arrogance, had been punctured in front of everyone. The CEO didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood tall, letting the truth reverberate. "You wanted me gone," she said at last. "But I am the foundation of this gala. And tonight, everyone here will remember that power doesn't always wear the costume you expect." The chandeliers flickered, light scattering like applause across her gown. And the ballroom, once an accomplice to cruelty, shifted its allegiance in a single heartbeat. The moment the words left her mouth, the ballroom fractured. The billionaire's wife stood frozen, crimson sequins catching the light like shards of glass. Her hand clenched around the champagne flute so tightly the stem trembled. Her smile, once painted in confidence, dissolved into something raw fear clawing at the edges. Her circle of friends pulled back subtly, their laughter dying in their throats. The safety of mocking as a group evaporated the instant they realized the target was not powerless but pivotal. One woman in emerald green whispered, "Oh my God, she owns it." Another stared at the CEO in disbelief, silently calculating the career suicide of being on the wrong side of this moment. The floor manager who had been ordered to escort her out was now pale, his posture shrinking. He muttered, I didn't know, ma'am," but the words weren't meant for her. They were a shield against the wrath he imagined would fall on him next. At the balcony, the young reporter's live stream went wild. Comments scrolled so fast they blurred. "Witnessing history." She flipped the entire room. "That wife is done," the reporter herself whispered. The tide just turned. Though her audience didn't need the reminder, they could see it. The orchestra remained frozen, bows hanging, brass silent. Musicians exchanged uneasy glances, unsure if they should play, clap, or simply witness. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Some applauded quietly, hesitant at first, then louder as courage spread. Others gasped, covering mouths, stunned at the audacity of what they'd just heard. A few even pulled out phones openly now, no longer pretending discretion every second needed to be preserved. And the husband, the billionaire himself, seated near the dais, finally stirred, his face drained of color as his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He checked the screen, his eyes scanning whatever message had arrived. The blood left his cheeks. His wife's arrogance had detonated a landmine. He tried to stand, but the crowd's attention anchored him in place. For once, the power of his wealth wasn't enough to shield him. His empire was suddenly smaller than the woman standing tall in a stained orange gown. The wife whispered desperately, her voice a brittle thread. "She's lying. She has to be." But even her friends didn't echo her. They stared at her as if they'd just realized the queen bee was hollow. The Latina guest who had spoken earlier stepped forward, voice steady now. "I saw the donor list. Her name was there. She is the host." Applause rippled again, stronger this time, and the billionaire's wife staggered back as though struck. The black CEO didn't raise her hands for silence. She didn't need to. The room had turned itself over to her. And in that instant, the billionaire's wife, her husband, their circle, even the staff, all of them stood in the collapse of the illusion they had built. The hierarchy had been rewritten, and every witness knew exactly who stood at the top. The silence that followed was not peace, it was judgment waiting to be delivered. All eyes turned toward the black CEO, the woman in orange silk who had stood motionless through insult and humiliation, only to rise higher with truth. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight at the billionaire's wife. "You ordered me out of this room," she said calmly. "Now I order you out of your empire." A collective gasp swept through the hall. The CEO raised her phone once more. A single tap, her voice remained steady. "Terminate all active agreements tied to the Bennett portfolio. Effective immediately. Remove access. Freeze contracts. Alert the board." The earpiece crackled. "Confirmed, ma'am. Protocol initiated." At that moment, the husband's phone vibrated again, harder this time. He looked down, and his expression collapsed. No, this can't." His voice broke. He staggered, dropping into his chair like a man suddenly hollowed out. The wife spun toward him, panicked. "What is it? Tell them to stop it." But the black CEO's words sliced cleanly through her pleas. "You built arrogance on borrowed ground. And tonight, the ground has been reclaimed." Guests erupted into murmurs. Some clapped, not in mockery but in awe. The young reporter whispered to her mic, "Contracts canceled. It's happening live." She just crushed their $3.2 billion rupees chain. The wife's face flushed, then drained. She lunged a step closer, voice cracking, "You can't do this." "Oh." The CEO turned slightly, not even facing her fully. "It's already done." Her earpiece confirmed it. Bennett accounts frozen, Horizon records updated, notifications sent to legal and press. The orchestra, still silent, seemed to hold its breath with the crowd. The floor manager, who had once been ordered to remove her, now bowed his head, whispering, "Forgive me." The staff at the champagne tower lowered their trays, standing straighter, as though silently choosing sides. The husband slumped further, phone in hand, scrolling through emails that sealed his downfall. His empire had evaporated in less time than it took to deliver a toast. And the wife, once glowing, laughing, spilling wine like a queen, stood broken, her crimson dress now a costume for humiliation. The CEO placed her phone gently back into her clutch. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply let the weight of justice hang in the chandeliered silence. The punishment wasn't rage. It wasn't chaos. It was control, absolute and irreversible. And everyone in that ballroom understood. The real power had never been loud. It had been waiting, patient, silent, until the perfect moment to strike. The chandeliers glittered above, scattering fragments of light across a room that had just witnessed a dismantling. The laughter, the arrogance, the mockery, all of it had been stripped bare in front of silk gowns and black tuxedos. The black CEO stood tall, her orange gown stained but her presence radiant, stronger than any unmarked fabric. The stain no longer looked like humiliation, it looked like proof that she had endured the strike, and still walked away untouchable. She turned once, slowly, letting her gaze sweep across the ballroom. Every eye followed. Guests who had whispered, laughed, or stayed silent now stared with reverence, some ashamed, some inspired, all changed. Her voice carried clear, steady, deliberate. Respect isn't measured by diamonds or by last names printed on invitations. Respect is character. It's how you treat those you assume are beneath you. Tonight, that choice defined you, and it ended you. The billionaire's wife sagged against her chair, her red dress suddenly garish under the lights. Her husband hid his face in his hands, phone buzzing endlessly with notifications he could no longer stop. Their empire worth billions had been erased by a single voice delivered calmly in front of witnesses. The young reporter on the mezzanine whispered into her mic, "This isn't just a gala anymore. It's history. Justice, live." Her live stream comments swelled. "Power without screaming. This is dignity. Orange dress forever." The CEO placed her phone back in her clutch, as if closing a book already finished. She took one step forward, and the crowd parted without hesitation. Guests shifted, making space, not out of fear but out of respect. At the doorway, she paused once more, turning her head just enough to let her final words cut through the hall. "You thought silence was weakness, but silence is strategy, and tonight it was your last mistake." The room exhaled as though it had been holding its breath. Applause rose, not thunderous, but steady, swelling like a tide that couldn't be stopped. Phones stayed raised. The story was already leaving the room, already climbing timelines, already sparking conversations in cities far beyond those chandeliers. And the black CEO walked out unhurried, head high, gown gleaming like embers, not shouting, not pleading, just power-controlled, undeniable, unforgettable, because justice doesn't always come with fire and noise. Sometimes it comes in silk, with calm eyes and a voice that doesn't need to rise. And in that ballroom, every witness knew they hadn't just seen a woman win, they had seen a world shift.